Mother's Rotten Apple, Chapter 18. The dinner table was the exact diameter of a pilgrim's wagon wheel. The table rested inside Mrs. Lowry's kitchen, for the house contained no space for a separate dining room. Cluttering the tabletop were 5 plates of boiled dandelion greens with sides of fried rabbit and gravelly mashed potatoes. 3 half-melted taper candles were also placed on the miniature table. They glowed upon the faces of those poking at their scroungy meals, transforming their beige complexion into various shades of terracotta. The room was sized so if everyone sitting at the table leaned backwards, they'd each bump their head on a different wall, and it was literally impossible to set one's elbows on the table without tipping over a candle or pushing aside someone's dinner plate. The table was only built for 4, yet Elmer, Dale, and Mrs. Lowry's eldest child managed to squeeze in all the same. As for the rest of Lowry's shack, there were 2 bedrooms built into the house's opposite ends, one for the children, one for the adults. Mattresses alone took up well over half of both bedrooms. There was also an outhouse located behind the shanty, along with a dehydrated garden. Pasted to the walls were newspapers dating back to the Almond City Journal's founding years. The newspapers were for insulation, yet the nightly cold invaded the home's interior and made its presence unmistakably known regardless. No newspapers were readable, not just due to the candle's ineffectiveness at producing any more than 5 inches worth of light, but because hanging from the walls was every kitchen utensil imaginable. Saucepans, frying pans, stock pots, spatulas, all blackened from repetitive use, whisks, knives of all shapes and sizes, cutting boards, dough rollers, and more hung from the walls as well, with the decorativeness of Christmas tree ornaments. Dale studied the walls as the Lowry family ate. He and Elmer weren't given plates, nor were they given chairs to sit on. Instead, Elmer was provided a wooden gallon bucket, and Dale sat upon a stack of world encyclopedias. No conversation was being held that night. Instead, the family indulged in the timid tension of having 2 surprise guests over for dinner, guests whom 4/5 of Lowry's family had yet to speak a single syllable to, and 3/5 had yet to make proper eye contact with. 10 minutes passed before Dale grew tired of the incessant clinking of silverware tapping against glazed earthenware. He knocked on the wooden tabletop and announced to all, "Hello, everybody. Pleased to meet you. My name is Dale Hartsfield. Y'all can just call me Dale." "And I'm Elmer West. Boy, am I glad we came across you fellas in your lovely home. But I don't reckon I've caught any of your names just yet. Just the last name, of course. Lowry. Ain't that something of a name?" Elmer spoke with an uncouth confidence typically reserved for reuniting with childhood friends, loud volume and all. Dale flushed with embarrassment.
"Oh, well, I'm Virginia,"
Mrs. Lowry said.
"My husband's name is Albert. Our 3 sons are, from youngest to oldest, P.L., initials for his granddaddy Pete Lowry. Then there's R.L., initials for his great-granddaddy Ralph Lowry, and J.L., initials for his great-great-granddaddy Jonathan Lowry."
She spoke with a mouse-like dejection, as though she was being held at gunpoint. Dale didn't understand the reasoning behind the family's trepidation. Did they simply assume every stranger who passed by was out to snag whatever was left to be taken? Or did they know about the prison escape? He desperately wanted to believe in the former option.
"Wonder when the next big storm's gonna come around. Been a long time since we had one. Willing to bet we're due for a big one even,"
R.L. said to Albert. R.L. was 15 years old, Dale supposed, and he was the first person that night to speak without sounding terrified or awkward. He was simply a son asking his father about the weather. "Now, you talking about dust storms, rainstorms, or thunderstorms? 'Cause I strongly doubt the middle one's gonna peek his refreshing head around the corner any time soon. We might get some thunder, but no rain," Albert said in between bites of corn and potatoes.
"Don't matter what type of storm we get,"
Virginia said.
"I'm telling y'all, the holy blood of Jesus Almighty could come pouring down in our field, and it wouldn't change nothing. Nothing's sprouting out there now, and nothing ever will. Not in our lifetime, at least. We ought to move on to the city. It's a—"
Yeah, I know what you think it is," Albert harangued. "A place of the future. A place with modern technology to help rid us of these modern problems. I've heard it all before, and it's all bull. Guess what, Virginia? Them folks living up in the city want to get out too. They want to get with them mountain folks where everything's more spread out. And them mountain folks want to get with us where they can grow fields of crops. And we want to get to the city where we can work on something other than growing weeds. It's all one big depressing loop.
Well, where will we be once our farm and the rest of our cash gets taken away? Where'll we sleep when Mr. Quinn decides to show up again?
Virginia lamented. All chivalry drained from the children's every feature upon hearing Mr. Quinn's name. Dale and Elmer, who'd only heard of Quinn once prior, also felt themselves shrink at Mr. Quinn's mention. Albert crisscrossed his silverware on top of his plate as though his appetite had perished completely. After chewing his final bite, he spoke in the sage tone commonly found among aging proletariats. Listen here. Mr. Quinn ain't taking nothing from us. He can bully us and send his baking pals after us all he wants, but we're staying put. I got roots on this farm deeper than any weed, any plant, any tree. Mr. Quinn can dig and cut and pull all he wants. He ain't gonna lift my roots 1 inch. Unless, of course, you keep on poisoning them with your useless negativity.
Excuse me,
Dale butted in, with meekness identical, if not worse, than Virginia's.
who in tarnation is Mr. Quinn? And why's he harassing you fellas? I mean, you're nice people and all. It don't make any sense.
Surprisingly, Albert's face didn't crack when his lips stretched into a smile. Instead, a burning negativity filled those eyes. It was the grin's overcorrective counterbalance. You're a lucky son of a gun never needing to deal with Mr. Quinn. Being a Christian and a father, I can't say much about how I feel about him, especially at the dinner table. 5 years ago, he was a real nice fellow. He'd drop by and say hi, lend us some money whenever we needed it. Always brought something good to eat. Again, a real lad, or at least he appeared to be. But now... Albert fell silent. Now, all his generosity dried up, just like the banks he owned, leaving a wicked, evil, depraved son of a... He looked to his children as though just now remembering their presence, and continued. Gone. He's got enough dough stored up in his mansion to retire from, but he still wants to pump his banks full of cash again. So he came out to every man and woman in the county who owes him anything and demanded they give him everything. We told him we don't got nothing to spare, and things heated up between us. Soon we was tussling each other. Our old dog, J.C., got excited and bit that looker he enjoys traveling around with. Mary, her name is. I shot J.C. between the eyes later that night, but Quinn still hates us more than the devil for what J.C. did. I think it ain't even 'cause his dog got bit up, but because that expensive little skirt she wore now has a few holes in it.
Now he's trying to take everything away from us.
R.L. spoke up.
Even if it ain't actual money, he'll still take it and put it up for auction. Ain't that right, Pop?
That's his plan, but it ain't ours, Albert said. When he puts all our stuff up for auction, our friends and neighbors are going to be the only ones bidding. One person will bid 1 penny for one item, and no one will bid nothing else. Next item, another person bids only 1 penny, nothing else. Sold. Once they get that cheap item, they'll give it back to us, and we'll someday repay 'em. 'Cause Mr. Quinn shouldn't have messed with the Lowrys, should he, boys? P.L., R.L., and J.L. all gave a collective no.
And if Mr. Quinn steals anything from anyone else, we'll spend our pennies and get their stuff back to them too. Right, Dad?
P.L. asked. Let's pray that time never comes around, Albert said. 'Cause if it does, I fear we'll have nothing to give our friends and neighbors. God knows we've got nothing to give them now. The question flashed across everyone's mind quicker than a flinch. Dale saw the subtle yet sour change in everyone's posture, but nobody asked the question, not because they feared the answer, but because there wasn't an answer to fear. If you can't afford to help your neighbors now, what makes you think your neighbors can afford to help you? Dinner ended when P.L. passed his plate to Dale and Elmer, all while watching them closely to assure they didn't pull a funny on him. It struck Dale as humorous. P.L. resembled a stray dog approaching him for food, only he and Elmer were the ones receiving a treat. They each received one chunk of rabbit breast, untouched, lukewarm, and more appetizing than any food the mug provided. After supper, everyone gathered around the house radio and listened to whatever it had to play. Homer and Albert cracked jokes about President Hoover and the terrible job he did at fixing up America, as well as jokes regarding Hoover's appearance, mannerisms, and speech patterns. After a good bit of family time, the candles burned themselves out, signaling bedtime. Dale and Elmer headed out to the barn. They fell asleep that night as quick as they woke up the next morning. Chapter 19. The sky glittered with a blizzard of stars, and the night air was cold enough to make Mr. Lowry's dead horse shiver. Yet Dale didn't wake until J.L. yelled from outside the barn, "Come on, wake up, y'all! We've got a busy day ahead of us!" Dale should have appreciated working under the twinkling canopy of stars. He should have embraced the early morning coolness, and he should have shown utmost approbation towards J.L. for allowing them to toil in such fine conditions. For, as the industrious minutes transformed into hours, the stars' friendly shine was eventually replaced by the sun's despotic inferno. Hour after hour, he and Elmer spent disking the field in front of Albert's shack. They weren't provided any formal farm equipment to work with aside from a pair of peeling leather gloves and 2 garden hoes. If the two had been bound at the wrist by steel chains and they exchanged their hoes for sledgehammers, the working experience at Lowry's would have been nearly identical to that at the mug. The sun scorched, Dale's hands blistered, and his legs wobbled with faintness just as before. At one point, Elmer began humming the dreaded work tunes to himself. Whether his humming was intentional or subconscious, Dale knew not. All he knew was that he would never sing along. He already spent a lifetime and a half moaning chain gang songs. Not anymore. "Really is a shame Albert couldn't come out here and help us weed," Dale said, glancing towards the house's front porch. There sat the patriarch, with his face buried in a newspaper and a pitcher of iced lemonade on the coffee table beside him. Dale and Elmer stood far enough into the frontal field for Albert to be seen with relative clarity, but not close enough for Albert to hear the two confide with one another. "Really could use the extra help, or at least a glass of that refreshin'-looking juice, don't you think?" "You got it right about that lemonade statement, I'll give you that. But Albert's too old to do much good when it comes to laborin' around," Elmer panted. "He's reached the age where the best he can do is sit back, point fingers, and hark at us when we screw up. And so far he's doing a terrific job at it. Now if his sons were the ones sitting around being lazy, my head would be spinning in anger." "No, they're good workers. They're up patching that hole in the hayloft roof right now, I think. Good deal, too. That damn draft kept blowing on me and waking me up last night. I wanted to pin my blanket over that hole just to plug it up." Dale snickered breathlessly. "Oh, but what I'd give for a cool gust of wind now." "The draft ain't nothing. Although them kitties living up there, they're something worth worrying about. Feisty little misfits. I'd be sleeping and suddenly one of them would be pouncing on me as if I were some sort of giant mouse. What Albert ought to do is sell them, but God, who in the right mind would want to buy 'em?" Dale stopped digging his hoe in the dirt, and his eyes wandered away to the field's open nothingness so he'd focus better. "Someone'll buy 'em. Some family with a little girl that'll probably cry if her daddy don't get her some kitties. And maybe that extra money will help Albert with his bank issue," he mumbled to himself. "Yeah, that'll help him plenty. And if we help him with that, maybe he'll let us off the hook and we can get on our way quicker. I think I ought to ask him about it." Dale dropped his hoe and began traversing the field towards Albert's porch. "Now, Dale, don't go bothering Albert over some plan that ain't gonna work. There's too many maybes involved. How about we just finish up our chores and skedaddle out of here?" Without losing the rhythm of his step, Dale said, "No, this'll be quicker, I swear. Just continue weeding and let me handle it. Shouldn't take any longer than a—" Dale froze. He'd gotten close enough to the porch to not just see Albert, but to see the newspaper Albert was reading. Ever since the beginning, Dale knew this would happen. Not some similar hypothetical daydream. No, he knew this exact situation would occur, and never had he felt so wrong about being right. "We gotta get out of here," he mumbled. "What?" Elmer asked. "Albert's reading a newspaper. I thought you was all for reading." "I am,
but the paper got our picture in it. We're slapped right on the back page, and I bet you $1,000,000 I know why that is.
Well, nobody likes the paper anyhow. Chances are he'll grow bored of it and toss it in the trash before he reaches the back.
No, no, no. He's too poor to simply spend his money on a newspaper and then toss it out before finishing it. He'll get to the back and then what? He'll call the cops and we'll have to deal with the sheriff for a third time, and I ain't willing to deal with him for a third time. I wasn't even ready for the second time.
Albert's most likely an uneducated slow reader. If we just hurry up and do all the chores, we might be able to skedaddle before he even reaches the back page.
Are you kidding me? He's already blown through 2 pages since I noticed our picture.
A new type of sweat broke out all over both Dale and Elmer's body. Not the hot type that lathered them due to intense heat and labor. This sweat was sharp and frosty. So, what do we do? Elmer asked.
We could distract him by yelling his barn's on fire, then run while he ain't looking.
Or we could say a dust storm is coming and run.
Or say nothing and run away, hoping he don't notice.
If he chases after us, we could lay down our hose so we'll step on them and get whacked in the face.
You think a hoe could stop him? You ever step on a hoe while running at full speed?
No. I have. It got right between my eyes, and I was out for a week. Freddie began thinking it killed me and was going to bury me if I didn't wake up.
Well, I don't want Albert to be buried alive.
Well, we might get buried dead very soon if we don't act quick.
Maybe we shouldn't act at all. We could just sit him down and talk it out like gentlemen. I'm sure he'll understand. He ain't blinded by revenge like that sheriff.
A new conversation stirred up. It wasn't between Elmer and Dale, nor was it linguistic. The debate was all inside Elmer's head, and it was between the rational and irrational halves of his brain. Yes, we're going to have a conversation, and it's all going to work out fine. One side screamed, "No, there's no fun in that, so I ain't buying it. We'll knock 'em out and scram. That would be fun," screamed the other. After a lengthy internal debate, Elmer's naughty and well-mannered mindsets met in what they considered to be the middle. He cupped his hands over his mouth and screamed, "Hey, Albert, get over here and bring that newspaper. I want to show you something."
"Okay, just a second,"
Albert responded. There was some trust in his voice which warmed Dale's chest.
"Yes,"
Dale thought, "we're going to do the right thing.
We're going to clear our names to at least one person, and that'll be a good start on the road to redemption."
Albert finished drinking his lemonade, folded the newspaper into his pocket, and started towards Dale and Elmer. He walked with the bounce and swiftness of a man straight out of his teens. While watching the old man strut, Dale realized he and Elmer were to thank for his cheeriness. The extra labor he and Elmer provided must have lifted a world off of Albert's shoulders, so now Albert walked without pain.
"How can I help you?"
Albert asked when he reached Elmer. Elmer held out an open palm. "May I see that paper? I promise I'll give it back. I'm just curious about one little thing."
"Go ahead. Here."
Albert gave Elmer the paper. "Thank you, sir." Elmer smiled. He unfolded the paper and flipped to the back. There they were. A photo of a much younger and handsomer Elmer placed beside a photo of Dale, who used to sport a smaller mustache and a clean-cut hairdo. Dale leaned in and they both skimmed the headline. To their surprise, it didn't have to do with the mug at all. Instead it read, "Wanted, Hobo Crow has been identified as these two individuals. Very dangerous." The shock didn't fill Elmer half as much as it did Dale. Instead of showing any sign of dismay, Elmer simply stared Albert in the eyes and tore the newspaper in half. Albert watched, equally perplexed as Dale. Elmer tore the halves in half, and those in two as well. He continued shredding the paper until it was a fine confetti, which he joyfully tossed in the air. "Thanks for the paper, Al, my pal," he said, turning to the road where the car was parked. "Come on, Dale, let's go." The two left Albert standing awestruck in the field. He continued standing there, alone and without a clue of what to do. After a few minutes of loneliness, he returned inside with Virginia. He refused to cry when telling her what happened. She knew how close he was to tears, nonetheless.